I like to say that I have been feminist since I was old enough to think, by which I mean that my earliest memories are memories of my questioning things that just didn't seem to make sense to my young mind. I remember in my hometown being told, the most interesting masquerades are coming out, but girls can't see it, so you have to go inside. And I used to think, but why? I really would like to see the most interesting masquerades. It took a lot of just watching the wall, so noticing little things like that as a child, questioning them, not being satisfied with the answers the wall gave me, and just always finding that there was something in my spirit that bristled at all of these things. We always must speak out, but it's not even just that we've been told that you can boast about assaulting women and become the president of what is ostensibly the greatest country in the world, but it's also that you can be a woman running for office and be vilified and demonized in ways that a man running for office would never be. And that somehow this was mainstream and often excused. I think it's important to continue to speak up, to continue to question, to continue to challenge. I think silence should never be an option. It can be things like, calling up your local representative to say it is immoral that you are defunding programs that make it possible for women to access reproductive health care. It is immoral. Just speaking about those things, I think are important. I noticed that women have been socialized to reduce themselves. And I think our world accomplishes this by praising and rewarding women for reducing themselves. And there's a sense in which girls are raised to think that your ability to sacrifice yourself, your ability to reduce yourself, somehow contributes to your worth. We talk about girls and women in that way. We don't talk about boys and men in that way. And I noticed this very early on. But there's something I think insidious about that praise. Because in some ways it's a way of controlling you. It's a way of keeping you down, and will give you a cookie if you put yourself down, I think the only reason that gender is a problem in the world is because of sexism. So in other words, in some ways, sorry to digress to race, but please. I can't because, for me they're intertwined, being a black woman. I think, I'm not black on some days and a woman on other days. I'm both at the same time. So in some ways like race, in the way that I think the reason race matters is because of racism. In other words, if racism didn't exist, I would think we shouldn't talk about race. Race would then just be, I think the only conversations we would then have about race would be, what color foundation should you use, right? Yeah. Are you pink-toned? Are you yellow-toned? That then would be the kind of conversations we would have. But because of racism, in other words, because the world has made assumptions about people who look a certain way and has treated them a certain way, and a system of oppression has grown around that, that's why race matters. And I think gender is the same thing. That the only reason that I want to talk about gender, or the only reason I think gender is important, is that it is the basis for a system of oppression. Gender is a problem because of sexism. In other words, all this talk about women is because they have been oppressed because they are women. What if we tried reversing that just to kind of make somebody unwilling to see? And so I came up with that. And I think it mostly works if you apply it to certain situations. But the thing again about the complexity of sexism is that sometimes it can seem a little simplistic to say, well, if you were a man, you wouldn't do that. Because, it can be very layered, the way gender, but it's still a tool that I like to use. It's not at all to suggest that I think sexism is worse than racism, because I don't. And I think that kind of talk doesn't even make sense. So when somebody says sexism is worse or racism is worse, as a person who is a black woman, it's odd, because then, just like I said earlier, I'm thinking, well, maybe on the days when I'm a woman and I'm not black, things will be better. Or on the days when I'm black, So the idea that somehow one can compare just the horrendous effects of both, it doesn't make sense to me. However, My saying that I feel angrier about sexism is really about my own sort of very personal experience, which is that in the circle of people I love, the people I spend time with, my family and friends, I never feel that I have to explain racism. Mm-hmm. The people I know and the people I love, and they're not all black people, they're people from different parts of the world, of different races, they all get anti-black racism. Mm-hmm. I never feel that I have to prove it. I'm never told that, oh, it's really not race, in the way that many, many black people continue to be told in the world today. So that doesn't happen in my small circle. So there's a sense in which if the people with whom you share space not so much agree with you as see something in the same way, it's affirming. Yes. But with sexism, I find that that's not the case. I find that often with the people I love, the people I know, I'm sometimes looked at as, you're just being a little oversensitive, you're overdoing it, really. Maybe it's just time to shut up about this. All right, we've heard enough about this sexism. All right, feminists, oh, that's enough. That often happens. And also, I find that I'm often asked, well, prove to me how that is really a sexist situation. So the assumption, the starting off premise for many of the people I love and know is, it's not sexist, you prove it to me. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't happen with racism. A system of, so what we call patriarchy, also really thrives on having lower standards for men and boys. So just the simple example of the sort of, the idea of controlling women's bodies, not because it's somehow good for women, but because men need to be protected from some sort of thing that they can't control, right? And so because of that, we lower the standards so much, I think, because really what we're saying is that men are subhuman. That's really the subtext of that, you know? I mean, obviously this book is about raising a girl, but I do think it's as important to raise boys feminist. And I think, and I've always said that I think that men have to be part of the conversation. Right? We have to start to just smash and dismantle the way we have constructed masculinity. Yes. I think it's toxic. You know? We have to, we have to teach little boys to be vulnerable. And we have to make vulnerability something to be proud of. Because, and I also have lately been thinking about the power of shame. I mean, there are many instances in which shaming is not a good thing. But I've been thinking, what if we start to teach boys to be ashamed of many of the things that define toxic masculinity? What if we teach boys to be ashamed of not being able to communicate, not being able to sort of be in touch with their emotions? What if that were things to be ashamed of? What if vulnerability was a thing to be proud of for boys? And I think related to that, it's important for us to teach girls that it's okay for boys to cry. Because I also think that there's a sense in which living in a system as we do, women absorb these ideas of toxic masculinity. And there are instances in which men want to be vulnerable, but the women say to them, you're not allowed to be.
But given that most women, many women, are marrying men who are non-feminists or who aren't feminists, how does a woman go about ensuring that different reality? I mean, you've sort of touched on it, but I'd love for us to talk about it more. So that reality, not just for herself and her daughters, but for her whole family.
See, and even this conversation for me is interesting because, again, it's the woman's burden. Yeah. You see?
Yeah.
It's such an interesting thing, right? So now she has to mother the children and mother the husband. And I'm just thinking, can a woman get a damn break? I think the women here are like, yes, we're tired. But when I say that I think women can be complicit, it's because women absorb these ideas that we've been taught from childhood. And, I know many women, for example, who say that they feel guilty about the husband or their male partners doing housework. Or they say, I don't really know how to divide housework. Like a friend of mine recently said, to the women who say they don't know how to divide domestic work, imagine that you're living with a woman. How would you divide the work? Then divide it that way. It's true. When I think about this book and think about my own feminist thinking, it's important for me to remind myself that it's about trying, right? It's not about perfection. Yes. And it's about trying. You know, you just keep trying, and we will fail at things, and it's never going to be perfect, but we have to keep trying.